line was longer today for coffee for some reason. But we'll start up. What questions do you have for me for today, from the sermon or from anything else? Open questions for anybody. Kim, please.
I know you've answered this before, but why is our Old Testament reading different than like the published lectionary?
Oh, I meant to look into Habakkuk a little bit because it's challenging. And I was reading it thinking, I wish I refreshed my memory of why Paul quotes this. Kim's good question is, why is our lectionary a little different than the published lectionary of the Missouri Synod for the one-year series? Now, you're all probably aware by now that there's two published lectionaries. One's a 3-year, one's a 1-year. The 1 year is comparatively older by a long shot. The 3 year is a newer arrangement. Most churches are using the 3 year. We're using the 1 year, which would have been the lectionary that was used, by for the good part of the last 1,000 years or so, and by Luther and Walther. And that said, in the ancient church, Kim, as you know, they, for some strange reason, they did not specify an Old Testament reading in the lectionary, with a minimal exception. There's a few Sundays where they had one. And so we want to have an Old Testament reading every Sunday. And so it's up to us really to assign. We didn't inherit it, so we assign an Old Testament reading. The Old Testament reading that the Missouri Synod uses it is maybe about... There's still people filtering. The Old Testament reading that the Missouri Synod has appointed is about 20 years old or so. They maybe less, but it's new to this hymnal. And I just decided early on I was going to use an Old Testament kind of collection of readings or a series of readings that came from my professor back at the seminary. He'd written this series before the Missouri Synod published theirs in fairness. And we could make the switch. It's not a big deal. But the reason that I still use Dr. Judish's series of Old Testament readings, even though it's not what the Missouri Synod is using, is because I like his better. And it's for this reason. The readings of the Missouri Synod right now have decided to make most of their Old Testament readings kind of narrative accounts that correspond to the gospel reading by reading like a story. So, what's the best way to describe it? Here's the gospel reading for the day, and isn't the Old Testament reading a story that's kind of similar? And oftentimes it has sort of a typological shadowings that point forward to it, or if you read it in a certain way. I wish I had a good example right now, but off the top of my head, I don't have great examples. Whereas Dr. Judish, he really wanted to select readings that were prophetically anticipating the gospel reading. So you'd have a gospel reading, and the Old Testament reading was the very prediction in the book of Isaiah or Jeremiah or something of the teaching that would come about in the gospel reading. So Dr. Judish always thought that the prophetic material of the Old Testament was more important, and he's right about that, was more important than the narrative accounts, like the history accounts, Genesis, Exodus, both important, but that the preaching content of the Bible was more important than the stories of the Bible or the narrative events. And that's the reason. Today you can tell. Well, what's the Old Testament reading in the hymnal? Is it Revelation? Who has a hymnal? Because if you can look at, you'll find the lectionary series in the front of the hymnal. You can see your A, B, and C, and then the 1 year series, and it probably Reformation. And you'll be able to tell me then what the hymnal says the Old Testament reading is for today. And what is it? I'm wondering if it isn't Revelation, which is not an Old Testament reading.
You're looking at the 1 year?
1 year. Nobody knows. It's a mystery. Can you find it? Don't make me look for it. I don't.
It's Revelations
14. Revelation 14. It's not an Old Testament reason. Well, that one's appealing. Is it Romans 3 and then John 8 also? Yeah.
Or Matthew 11.
Oh, yeah, Matthew 11. That's also appealing. Why Revelation 14? It's Revelation 14, 6 and 7. Anybody?
Because it's about Luther, maybe.
It was thought at the time of the Reformation that Revelation 14 was a prediction of the teaching of Martin Luther. Yeah, that Luther made it into the book of Revelation.
Is that still believed, Pastor? By some and elsewhere?
Yeah, it's still believed. The question isn't, I think it does refer to Luther. The question isn't, does it refer to Luther, but does it refer singularly to Luther? Or could it refer to other people throughout the history of the church? But if you force me up against the wall and tell me, what do you think? I'm probably going to answer right now. I believe it's singularly a reference to Martin Luther. Who was it, Bugenhagen, who preached at Luther's funeral? He preached on this text, Revelation 14, and said this verse is a prediction of the preaching and the life of Martin Luther. So that's not a new thing. It's right. Okay, anyway. Other questions today? Yeah, Ralph.
In the gospel, the Jews say we are Abraham's descendants and have never been in bondage to anyone. How can you say you will be made free? That doesn't really make sense, though, because they were in bondage to the Egyptians. So do you know what's going through their brains there?
Yeah, Ralph's question, I've engaged this before because it's an interesting and fascinating kind of thing. They were Christians, by the way, because it says to the Jews who believed in him. So you have Jewish Christians who believed in Jesus. And he says, if you believe the truth, it'll set you free. They said, set us free. We're not in bondage. We've never been into bondage to anybody. But we don't think they're dumb. I don't. I think they know the history. And they know so this could either be political or it could be spiritual. So which is it? I don't think there's any doubt that it got to be political because they were in bondage to Egypt. But not only that, they were presently in bondage to their consternation to who? To Rome. They were very upset. They knew they were in bondage. That was the whole problem. So to suggest that they would say, we've never been in bondage, that they were just ignoring the political realities, I think is attributing to them stupidity. So it must be that they were talking spiritually. They were saying, we're Abraham's descendants. We are not in bondage to sin. We are not enslaved to any kind of demonic, spiritual, sinful thing. And the Lord comes right up against it. So he doesn't, that's why he says, if you've ever sinned, you're in bondage to sin. You're a slave of sin. It's not like Luther's changing the subject. He's directly answering their question. And he's saying that for the Son has to set you free. You cannot free yourself. You are not free now, and you're not free unless the Son sets you free. Okay, other questions? Somebody else had their hand up? Okay, Proverbs chapter 12, verse, I think, 17 today. Proverbs 12, 17. This is a hard one. They're all challenging. This one's tough to nail down. I'll tell you what I think. Here's what it says from my translation. Whoever speaks the truth gives honest evidence, but a false witness utters deceit. Whoever speaks the truth gives honest evidence, but a false witness utters deceit. Now, as soon as you check over to the King James or New King James or other translations generally, you'll see that is not the way they're translating it. Generally, it's something like whoever speaks the truth proclaims righteousness, something like that. But a false witness utters deceit. The Septuagint version, the Greek version of the Old Testament, reads, a righteous man declares the open truth, but the unjust witness is deceitful. The Greek version then, I think, captures what probably the Hebrew version is pushing on here, and that is something like this. At least this is my reading of it, with admitted difficulties on the translation. Nevertheless, my reading would be a righteous man or righteous person, that is a Christian person, will cultivate a discipline of telling the truth in all circumstances. A Christian is a truthful person. Whereas a false witness, that is a false person, an unbeliever, utters deceit. Deceit or lies come naturally to an unbeliever. Truth matters a lot more to a Christian than it does to an unbeliever. So the takeaway on this probably is, but one part of our kind of loyalty to the Lord God and thanksgiving for His declaration of our innocence is that we cultivate a desire for the truth all the time. Just speak the truth. This is hard. It is hard to be a truth teller because what we're prone to is to assess the cost of the truth. If I tell the truth right now, what's it going to cost me? And we all fancy ourselves truth tellers, but actually, we all probably have imagined or been tempted to imagine some kind of price for what we would be willing to lie for. And if it's perceived that the lie is small and white enough, and the cost for telling the truth is high enough, then we'll make excuses for why it's okay to tell a white lie. If it's just too... This is... I don't know why I can't think of a good recent example of... I'm building a house, but I have when inspectors come and ask me questions, I'm like, I'm not sure you need to know what went on here. Because I know what an inspector can do. What? He can shut this thing down. He can cost me a lot of money. And I'm thinking, I don't know if it's worth being honest with this guy for the amount of money that could cost me. And that's a bad idea. We should just be ready that this very afternoon somebody's going to come and ask you a question, and it's going to be tempting for you to tell a white lie or a little deception, and you're just going to need to tell the truth. You just got to do it. In fact, I think that if you have a price in your mind, like if I was interviewing somebody to be the king of our land, one of my questions would be, what is the price upon which you set truth? In other words, how much would it cost you to tell? At what point, at what personal cost, money or whatever, would it be high enough of a cost for you to tell a little lie? What's your line? What's your breaking even? Because if there is a line for that person, then I know I'm dealing with a what? Not necessarily a liar, because he might tell the truth as long as it doesn't what? Cost him too much. But if there's a line in there somewhere, a cost, I'm dealing with a politician. Right? Because a politician always has a line. They always have a cost. And so for a politician, they got two questions to answer. One, is it true or false? What's the truth here? But number two, is it worth telling the truth? And it might usually be worth it to him. But he does need to decide, is it worth it to me to tell the truth? And if he has to ask that question, he's now become a politician. The answer to the question, what's the cost? What cost would I be willing what cost would I be willing to pay in order always to tell the truth? What is the right answer? Any cost. My life. I will die before I lie. That's it. That's what the truth means. Or that's what that is my line. I don't care what the cost is. And so I think Solomon is teaching that in this verse. Questions on that? Additions? Yeah, Andrew, please.
Is there ever a good time to lie?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking like Rahab, and
Yeah.
and how do we discern those times where it is good to lie?
I don't know how you discern it. Andrew's good question, and we've battled bantered about this here. Is there godly times when you need to lie? We're not here talking, and I know that you're not asking this question. We're not asking about times when it'd just be so costly to me that maybe it'd be a good idea to tell a lie. This is actually is there a time when it's a good work to be deceptive? And if you would read through the Bible, you would find that there is multiple examples of deception, which is godly. And it's in the instance when a neighbor's well-being is at stake, something like that. But I haven't put together litmus tests for when I know that it's a godly thing to tell a lie. Your example of Rahab is obvious. Rahab is...
Jonathan, when he said that David had gone back to his...
Yes, Jonathan tells lies to protect David. He's not trying to protect himself, but he's protecting David. The famous example in Exodus of those midwives who tell a lie to Pharaoh in order to save the lives of the children. But they do that. They're actually risking their own necks to do that. And those aren't just three. It's not just three. There's lots of them, especially in battle. If you would read through Kings, Samuel, Kings, Chronicles, in battle, they're constantly withholding the truth from people in order to advance the cause of their military efforts. But I wish I had a simple way to discern when a lie is a good work, because there are times when it is and when it's not.
Maybe like selfless lying not for personal gain, but for...
It would need to not be selfish, right? It would need to be for the benefit of my neighbor. But do you know, as soon as you say that, you're going to get into gray areas. I could say to the inspector, well, look, I've got my whole family here. I support a family. You're here, and your little thing, just because you're pushing on me, could cost me $10,000. That's just not worth telling the truth to a guy like you who could do something like that. And yet I think that's very clearly sinful to tell a lie like that. And I'm tempted towards it. Yikes. That's the bad thing, is it's tempting. Remember, David and I Mark, a bunch of us were out hunting. What's this, 2-3 years ago? And we, excuse me, we took a shot. David got an antelope. It was fun. We were out in the middle of nowhere in the grasslands. And he got an antelope. We took pictures, the whole thing. And then I turned around, and there was the game warden. He was popping up over the hill. And, the game warden's here. So I go out to meet him, and he's the nicest guy. He says, "Hey, you got one, did you?" And I go, "Yeah, no, it was my son. He got one. He's a youth hunter." And he's looking around, and he goes, "I see your casings are right here by your pickup. You didn't shoot off the hood of the pickup, did you?" And I go, "Oh, no. We were on sticks, on a tripod. We had him on a tripod when he shot." "Oh, yeah? Well, it looks here." And then I immediately knew what he was going to ask next. I went, "Oh." I said, "And he shot right off the road." Because you're not allowed to shoot off the road. But the thing we were on was, is not really a road. It was two little paths, in the middle of nowhere. And it occurred to none of us that we were actually on a road when he shot. That was the most nonsense thing. He was not a liar. No, very nice, respectable man. And he was asking, it's his job, you can't shoot on roads, you can't shoot over roads. You got to be 50 feet from the center line. And I thought, oh no, what am I going to tell him? He took the shot over there. We ran. We must have fallen out of our pocket. I mean, the things that. And I thought, no, we shot right off the road. None of us even realized that this was a road. We didn't think of it. We know better. We don't shoot off roads. And he goes, "Yeah, you did shoot off a road. I was watching you." And he said, but it's all right. Lots of people make this mistake. You were honest, and so let's just let this be a learn, this kind of thing. But, oh man, that was powerful. The thing that went like, ugh, I don't want to, but you better tell the truth. Yeah, Lois.
I sort of want to bring up a New Testament thing and ask your opinion. Because when they were asked to not speak anymore of Jesus,
Yeah.
and they answered, we must please God rather than men.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of, they didn't really say we're not going to tell the truth, that kind of thing. That wasn't in the dialogue, but the sense I get out of that is that you answer in a clear conscience. You have to have a clear conscience at the end of it all, between you and the Lord. So how you answer maybe worked out like that. Is that making?
It can't, yeah, you got to have a clear conscience, and ultimately there's going to probably be some gray areas, and we're not saying the Bible's unclear or something, but there could be some gray areas and some tough ones here. What Andrew's pushing on, though, and I know this already, I can jump out in front of him and know what he's asking. He knows our propensity to have an erring conscience or to trick our conscience into thinking, well, I did the right thing, when I was really just being selfish. And so he's pushing and saying, do you have some litmus tests? How would I know that I'm tricking myself into dishonesty or I'm actually doing a good work here? But those are tough. Sometimes we get into tough areas here. Okay, let's get into the book of Job. We worked last week in chapter 19, which is the central chapter of all the book of Job. And we deduced there that Job has a terrific and strong confidence in his Redeemer, his kinsman Redeemer, Goel in the Hebrew, that is the Redeemer who would be both his own flesh and blood, which is what a kinsman has to be. That's what kinsman means. It means a family Redeemer. Jesus is my family Redeemer. He must be both true man so that he can be my kinsman, but he also must be God, because the word Goel in the Old Testament is almost always a reference to God, my rock and my Redeemer. That's the word Goel, which is a reference to God. And so Job is confessing that his Redeemer, that he will know his Redeemer alive, his Redeemer both man and God. But he doesn't say my Redeemer is two persons, but one person. So Job is confessing his knowledge of the incarnation of the Messiah. The two natures. It's in-depth theology. And he's confessing that he will know this Redeemer alive out of the grave. So he's confessing Easter. So it's right for us to sing that hymn, I know that my Redeemer lives, in reference to Job. But then also he says, and at a latter time, remember, at a latter day, I will see him in my flesh. With my eyes and not another will behold him. And there what Job is confessing is, after he lamented how his body was coming unraveled and dying, and he knew it was going to die, and he thought he was hanging on by the skin of his teeth. One of the kids told me yesterday after the Broncos game, we won by the skin of our teeth. Yeah, which is, you don't remember that we were? So Job said, I'm going to die. I'm hanging on barely by a thread, by the skin of my teeth. I'm going to die, but I know that I'll see my Redeemer in my flesh and these eyes and not another. That's important in that chapter. And it's important in all the Bible because I don't think we get a clearer confession of the bodily resurrection and the continuity of the resurrection body with our present body. There are even still claims amongst those who believe on the last day in the new heavens and earth that we'll have a body, not just a soul, a disembodied soul, but that we will be both body and soul, which is true. But even I hear sometimes people say, but probably it's not this body, it's a substitute body. God will just make up a new body for me. So I'll have my soul, because they never say, I'll have a new soul. God will just spin up together a new soul. I always want to hang to my soul. That's important to me. But my body, I don't really care. God could just make a new body, new eyes, new hair, new whatever. That teaching cannot stand in the Bible because of a number of passages, but the clearest is Job 19. Job even anticipates it. He says, oh, by the way, with these eyes, my eyes, and not another set of eyes, but the very eyes I've got right here. So these eyes could get destroyed by worms, stricken off and eaten by worms. I didn't say that, he says that. But the very eyes that are stricken off and turn into ash and get eaten by worms will be the eyes that are resurrected and will see Jesus on the last day. That's why and you know I rely on this a lot. When I get questions about what heaven's going to be like, what the body's going to be like when we're raised, will we recognize each other? Well, the only extent to which we wouldn't be able to recognize each other is if sin has taken such a toll on our body that we're not recognizable now. Meaning, I may see, well, let me just flip this around, that'd be better. You may see me in the resurrection and say, whoa, I barely recognized you, you look good here. And that could be the case, that you might not quite recognize me that way, but you will soon enough. In heaven, that's because the continuity of our bodies. We also use this teaching from Job. I think it's very helpful to teach like the resurrection of bodies that are children bodies, small little bodies. Because what we're going to deduce from what Job says here is that the body that is raised on the last day is the body that we put in the ground. And so if we put a tiny body in the ground, then what's going to be raised? A tiny body. It's not a different body. Otherwise, we'd have to conclude that what? That God is somehow subbing out a different body. Now, I admit there could be surprises, and God might say, well, you overlooked that little detail or something. You were deducing some things. You went a little far. But I don't think so. I think that the Bible suggests and leads me to believe that the very body that we put into the ground, as Job teaches, is a body that will be raised, which means then that like little tiny, like if a child is raised as a Christian, they're buried as a Christian through faith in Jesus Christ, they'll be raised as a little child, that they'll be raised a child. Now the next obvious question is what? Do they stay children forever and ever in heaven? Well, I don't think so. Why? Does God intend for people to remain children forever and ever? He makes a little tiny baby. It gives us a baby. Does he intend for the baby to stay 10 pounds forever? No, his intention is that the baby would grow. So the baby might be raised a baby on the resurrection, but then he'll proceed to grow into full size, whatever you would call it, adulthood. But he'll grow in heaven in the new heavens and new earth instead of here.
So what about somebody who's old?
What about someone who's old? Now, I don't understand your question.
When my body is raised,
Yeah.
is it going to come up like it went down?
Yeah. Okay, gee, that's a good question. I said the body we put in the ground will be the body that comes up, but I didn't add into the equation this part, did I? Yet without the corruption of sin. So, Gene, this is the way I run this. Was it a product of the fall into sin that the little baby was small? Is smallness one of the things that came about because of sin in the world? Answer, no. No. Now, Gene, I'm going to let you make the description. What is it that you're talking about old? I don't know, let's just pretend that you don't have much hair. Is that a product of the fall into sin? I'm not positive it is, by the way. But let's just say it is. Yes. So when I'm raised, the consequences of sin are removed. We're raised incorruptible. Sin is taken away. So I'll get my hair back in the resurrection if losing my hair was a product of the fall into sin. I'm not positive it is, but
disco throwback.
That is probably part of sin. Yeah, but bodily pain, injuries, loss, even if your back isn't straight like it's supposed to be, whatever. I mean, if your body isn't strong like it's supposed to be, we're raised in weakness. We're sown in weakness. We're raised in strength, says Paul. We're raised in weakness, sown in weakness, raised in strength. So it'll be the body that we put in the ground, but without any of the consequences of sin.
Adam and Eve weren't gonna age, they were just going to be.
Right.
Aging itself is the product of the fall.
Aging is a product of this fall. As long as by aging what you mean is growing more and more, what? Feeble, weak. But Adam would have said, I don't know what you're talking about. I've aged. Without sin, he'd have said, I've aged many, many years. But he wouldn't. It's like people say, how old are we going to be in heaven? And I'll say, well, it depends on when you were born. If you were born, we'll just do the math. You'll be 1,000, you'll be 2,000 or something. What people want to know is, how old am I gonna look? And I think you're going to look about 32. About 32, yeah. Depends on when you were at your prime. Yes, sir.
But what about cremation?
Good question. What about cremation? Cremation is when we take the body. Now we don't favor cremation here. It's not. I don't think we can figure out from the Bible that it's forbidden, but we prefer bodily burial. But not because if the body is cremated, that what cremation is the burning up of the body into ashes, and then the what's a delicate word for what happens to the bones? Is that the best word you got? The bones are remaining, they get ground or whatever into dust, and then so it all can be put into a box. We are not saying that God's not going to raise the Christian body from its ashen condition in that way. He's perfectly capable of doing that, and will do it. We're confident He will do it. But same thing with bodies that are lost at sea and spread all over. Who knows what happens? We're not concerned about God's ability to raise such bodies. What we're concerned about in the case of cremation is what we're confessing when we decide to get a cremation. And oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes what people are really confessing with cremation is that they don't care the condition of the body. It doesn't matter. The body doesn't matter. The body is like an Amazon box. It was helpful for a while. It got whatever was important to me. But now that I have the thing inside the box, I can dispose of the box, throw it away. It doesn't matter. And that's not what we believe about the body. God is not done with the body. He's redeemed our body. So that's my twofold answer. We care about cremation versus bodily burial because of what we're saying when we make that choice. But we're not at all concerned if God's going to raise the body in whatever condition it's in. His power will do that. He made our bodies out of ash or out of dirt anyway, and He'll do it again. So now, did that get you to your good question, or did you have a follow? Okay. Somebody else had their hand. Thomas?
I have a different question about the Septuagint and how it deals with the part where it says, I know that I redeem you. Because it doesn't really say it at all like that at all. It says, for I know that He is eternal who is about to deliver me.
Yeah. Well, I looked at the Septuagint. I know He is eternal who is about to deliver me. But the word for deliver is deliverer, which I think is the equivalent of redeemer. Like I think that's what the Septuagint, the Greek version, is getting at there. I didn't look carefully enough at the Greek here to give it a complete look. You must have the Greek in front, or you have it. So I know He who is eternal who will deliver me would then, if you're reading the Greek, would be something like, I have a deliverer. He's going to deliver me, and that deliverer is an eternal being. But I didn't look into what the word is for deliverer. In the Greek, what is that? What's the freight of that word?
I think it wasn't the same word as redeemer, because when we looked at the Psalm last week that had the word redeemer as well, the word redeemer there was a different word than the one that's used here.
Do you remember what it was there in the Psalm 10, I think?
got it.
But it wasn't the equivalent of Goel. Okay, yeah, I think that this verse is a weakness, though. It's not a, it's you have it there, but it's not as strong. This verse is one of the reasons, but this is a side note. But that those who are making the argumentation for the superiority of the Septuagint, they're cherry picking verses like Isaiah 7 and Isaiah 53 and Psalm 23, etc., and saying, well, see, it's better in the Septuagint. The Septuagint's better. But they ignored Genesis 3:15 and Job 19. They don't point out that it's not as clear there in those verses. But I'll let that go for now. I don't mean to trouble you all with this thing. Okay, other questions? Yeah, Vic, please.
Is it Platonic? Is there some Platonism that think we would recognize one another regardless?
I think so. Yeah. I think I know what your question is, but you'll correct me if I'm wrong. Your question is, would it be Platonic in nature to think that we would recognize each other in heaven apart from our bodies? Like somehow we'd just be zapped with oh, I see Luana, but she has a completely different appearance in heaven than she has here, and I have but I still know her because I know her heart. Yeah, or something. Yeah, some kind of Platonic thing I can't see there. I think that's a sub-Christian Platonic idea. We recognize each other by what we can see in our bodies. The Lord gave us a body. Let's get to Job. I'm on Job. I'm sorry. Where am I? Job. Let's proceed with Job. Job chapter 20. What I would like to do here is move quickly through Job and reference you to my ridiculous summary of Job. And if you don't have that, I thought there might be some extra copies, although they gotten piled up. Is there anybody who, Larry, I don't know if you might look and see if there's some extra of the 2 pages of the summary of Job. And if anybody might find it useful. You don't need it. It's a little bit of a silly thing. But I am going to reference it just to maybe demonstrate some of the impulses that I had when I wrote that summary and where I found those impulses in the text of the Bible. And I'll start with chapter 20. I happen to have the NIV, which has more of my notes from past studies. So I'll be reading from the NIV here, generally, in chapter 20. So here's my summary of chapter. Let me just say the summary of chapter 19 to get us into 20. Summary of chapter 19, Job to his friends. Why do you care anyway? What do you have to gain by convincing me that this is my fault? I haven't done anything. God has done this. Everyone is alienated from me. And then here's our key verses. Oh, how I wish that my words were written in the Bible. Then I'll know my kinsman redeemer alive. And after that, he'll return as a man to the earth and raise my dying and despised body to perfection. I can't wait for that day. So I can't wait for that day, remember, is the statement we were puzzled about last week, how my heart yearns or how my kidneys are in pain within me. I know my Redeemer. I'm going to know my Redeemer. I'm going to rise on the last day of my flesh, and I'll see my Savior. I'm so miserable. Why is he miserable? It's because he does not have that now. He's still waiting now. And there's a kind of an anxious misery, especially in his condition, waiting for that day. Job was awaiting the day of the resurrection. So we can deduce from this, Job has confidence in a couple different things. Number one, that he has been declared righteous for the sake of his Redeemer in the past and in heaven, and that he will see his Redeemer alive and he'll be raised on the last day and it'll be perfect on that day. What he doesn't have certainty about is in the middle, where things are full of suffering and confusion, and he's not sure what's going on and what God's purposes are. Okay, chapter 20. Zophar picks up here. My summary in chapter 20. I'm not stupid, Job. Everyone has always known that the good prosper and the wicked are miserable. It's just the way it is. Can you tell what Zophar? He's condescending. Job has been saying, I'm a righteous man in God's sight, and here I am miserable. Zophar says, can't be. If you were righteous, then you wouldn't be miserable. You'd be happy. So, now, where do I get in that? I'm not stupid, Job. It sounds like Zophar is a little sensitive. I'm getting that from verse 3 in chapter 20. I hear a rebuke that dishonors me, and my understanding inspires me to reply. Yeah, that's my reading of Zophar is, that was mean. You insulted me. I'm not stupid, and so I'm going to, okay. And then he proceeds with, everyone's known this all the time, and I think that's pretty clear as you read through chapter 20. Especially in verse 29, you could see it there. Such is the fate God allots the wicked, the heritage appointed for them by God. And it's misery is what it is. So chapter 21, Job is responding. Now he's responding to Zophar. My summary. First off, how do you explain my suffering then? Second, open your eyes. If you ever got out of your own house, Zophar, you'd see that the wicked prosper all the time, even though they reject God. The wicked man is honored in life and even at his funeral. And so it's a statement contrary to fact. Look, Zophar, I don't know what you're talking about. Wicked people are all the time go through misery. And they're clearly wicked. There's no consistency. God is not acting consistently right now. That's what he's saying. Now, where do I get this? Job's impulses here. Well, how do you explain my suffering then in chapter 21? Here's what he says. It's in verse number, let's say 4. I'm at 21:4. Is my complaint directed to man? Why should I not be impatient? Look at me and be astonished. Clap your hand over your mouth. So what he's saying is, just look at me. I'm your counterexample. I am righteous in God's sight and I'm miserable. So put your hand over your mouth. Stop talking. All right. And then he says, second, open your eyes. If you ever got out of your own house, and actually that does have an impulse in the text. If you're in chapter 21, look at verse 29. Have you never questioned those who travel? That's actually better than my... Well, of course it's better. It's in the Bible. But he says, Zophar, if you do ever get out of your own house, then at least go to people who travel and do get out of their house. And you'll see that this is clearly the case. People who are wicked oftentimes prosper. And where do I get it that the wicked man is honored in life and at his funeral? You can see it in verse 32. He is carried, this is a wicked person. He's carried to the grave, and watch is kept over his tomb. The soil in the valley is sweet to him. All men follow him. A countless throng goes before him. That's his funeral. Look, do you see there's a wicked man, rejects God in his life, and what happens? They take care of his body, they give him burial, they all stand around and grieve and say nice things about him. The typical funeral of an unbeliever. And Job points that out. Okay, chapter 22. Now Eliphaz comes in. Remember, Eliphaz was the first person to talk. So we are now at round 3 of the speeches. And what you might have noticed, we'll pick this up a little bit later, the speeches are getting shorter as we go. Eliphaz, my summary. Job, you've sinned in multiple ways by failing to love others and by abusing them. And now you're getting a taste of your own medicine. You have to make this right with God, and everything will be restored to you. In fact, then you'll be able to help restore others, sort of like what we're doing for you right now. Okay. So where do I get this? Well, I think it's pretty obvious in most of chapter 22 that Eliphaz comes after Job and says, look, we don't know exactly what you did, but you clearly did something wrong. You failed to love people, and so on. You're getting a taste of your own medicine. Look at verse number 10. That's why snares are all around you, why sudden peril terrifies you, why it's so dark you cannot see, and why a flood of water covers you. Why? Because you've been terrible, Job, apparently. You've been a bad person, and that's why you're going through what you're going through. You got to make this right with God. Look for that at verse 21. Submit to God and be at peace with him. In this way, prosperity will come to you. Accept instruction from his mouth and lay up his words in your heart. Okay? So, if you would just, you can see what he's saying. If you would just get right with God, then prosperity will return to you. It's all lies. It's just, and then he says, in fact, to be able to help others, and that's in verse 29. When men are brought low, and you say, lift them up, then he will save the downcast. He will deliver even one who's not innocent, who will be delivered through the cleanness of your hands. So once you get your act together again, you'll be able to help other people once again. And when they're in a bad position, like you're in right now, you'll be able to go to them and give them counsel. So that's where I put my little parenthetical. It's kind of like what we're doing right now. It's really a borderline arrogant thing. And we need to be careful about this, by the way. When people are going through rough things, we oftentimes subtly imagine that they must have done something wrong. But I'm not going through a rough patch right now, so I must have not done anything wrong. And then I come to them and I think, well, look, you did something, but let me give you some advice about what's working so well for me. And why I'm going through. Well, who knows? Tomorrow, this situation could be completely switched. And I would know the reason why. Yeah. Okay, so that's Eliphaz. Job responds. Chapter 23. My summary. Job, if only I could get a hearing in God's courtroom. He wouldn't hold my sins against me, for he would confirm that I've not turned away from his word of law and gospel. And yet, he's treating me different here than he would in his court. Can you get that sense? Job constantly wants to just, look, I know in his court he declares me righteous. Can't I just go there? But I got to stay here. Now, where am I getting this? Let's see. Chapter 23. You can see it early in that chapter, but I'm particularly interested in that. I've not turned away from his word of law and gospel. That's in verse number 12. I've not departed from the commands of his lips. I've treasured the words of his mouth more than my daily bread. Job's not, he doesn't, he's not saying, I've kept the commands of his lips. He's saying, I haven't departed from them. That's different, isn't it? I hold to the Lord's word. I know what the law says, including where I've kept it and also where I've broken it. But I don't just deny the Lord's law. I've kept his law. I've kept it, meaning I believe it. I know what it is. And I also have kept his word, which is a treasure to me, and that would have to be his gospel. Okay. Chapter 24. Job continues. God, by the way, he says, God does the same with the wicked as well. So this is a tougher argument. I'm declared innocent, and God doesn't seem to care. But others are unbelieving scoundrels, and God also seems not to care. They seem to get away with it for a while. But God will sort this out after death. Job says, so clearly he's not sorting it out in this life. People are good, righteous Christian people. People are innocent, scoundrels, and wicked, and it doesn't look like God's even looking. But I know that he is looking, and I know he'll sort it out after death. Where am I getting this? let's start at verse number 12. I get the groans of the dying rise from the city, and the souls of the wounded cry out for help, but God charges no one with wrongdoing. The idea here is there's people that are out there abusing people, and it's horrible, and it doesn't seem like God is doing anything about it. Job points that out. But he does note they seem to get away with it, but only for a while. That's at verse 15. The eye of the adulterer watches for dusk. He thinks, no eye will see me, and he keeps his face concealed. In the dark, men break into houses, but by day they shut themselves in. They want nothing to do with the light. For all of them, deep darkness is their mourning. They make friends with the terrors of darkness. Like they're getting away with things under cover of dark for a while. Verse 18. Actually, it's where we're really trying to get to is 23. Verse 23. He may let them rest in a feeling of security, but his eyes are on their ways. For a little while they're exalted, and then they're gone. They're brought low and gathered up like all others. They're cut off like heads of grain. If this is not so, who can prove me false and reduce my words to nothing? So that's the impulse behind. He may not seem to be watching now. He's watching. And he'll sort it out after death, but that's all of Job's confidence. This is all going to be made right after death, because I know my Redeemer lives. But now it's confusing. Okay, 25, chapter 25. Bildad steps in. Now, there's an order to this, because Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar. What you're going to find is that Eliphaz is first, he gets 3 shots. Bildad's second, he gets 3 shots. Zophar's third, and he only takes 2 shots. Zophar drops off. And in fact, Bildad in chapter 25 hardly says much. If you look at your chapter there, it's very, very short. And this will be the last of the 3 friends that speak to Job. Bildad says in 25, Dear Job, God is really, really, really holy, and he sees everything. How can an ordinary man be declared righteous and clean in his sight? When he's so holy, you think he can be declaring people holy and righteous? It's arrogant, in fact, for you to think that. Now, where am I getting that from? Chapter 25, verse number 4. How then can a man be righteous before God? And actually, some of you have the ESV. Does it say that way? And
Which?
verse 25. How can a man be made right? The word is justified. Yeah, I should just say just. How can a man be justified in God's sight? How?
Right before God.
How can a man be right before God? But that's what. But the word we would translate it as, how can a man be justified before God? That's what Bildad is saying. How can that even happen? God is too holy for that. How can a man be justified, really, before God? And then he says it's arrogant. Verse 4, how can one born of woman be pure?
By being born again.
Yes. Well, I'm not the one saying it. Gene, Bildad is.
Huh.
But
Who's answering?
yeah, good. You're right. Amen. I'll agree with you. By being born again, by being declared righteous, by God's action, not by my own. But then verse 5, Bildad goes on, if even the moon is not bright and the stars are not pure in his eyes, how much less man who is but a maggot, a son of man who's only a worm. See, Job, you think you're righteous, but you're really just a maggot and a worm. And if you were humble enough to admit it, you'd agree. But you're so proud, you're going around saying you're righteous all the time and you're justified and God's pleased with you and you've got nothing against you. And it's just arrogant is all it is. That's what Bildad is saying. It's arrogant to insist I'm justified. It's not arrogant. Job is not being arrogant. It's because, again, Job is not relying on his own righteousness, but the righteousness of one who's achieved this righteousness on his behalf. But again, it's always the case that people who have this confidence are accused of arrogance. Okay, 26. Job to Bildad. Thanks for saying just what I needed to hear. That's, if you couldn't tell, sarcasm. And Job does use sarcasm. That's coming through here. Actually, though, God can declare anything he wants, and it happens. That's what he says. And that's what he demonstrates. If you'd read through 26, you'll be able to see Job saying, oh, God has said all kinds of things that didn't seem like they were very possible to do. He did, for instance, in 26, verse 12, by his power he churned up the sea or stilled the sea, I'm not sure. By his wisdom he cut Rahab to pieces. By his breath the skies became fair. His hand pierced the gliding serpent. And these are the outer fringes of his works. How faint the whisper we hear of him. In other words, look at, all he does is breathe a little or whisper, say a tiny little word, and he can do remarkable things. Surely, here's the point, surely he can declare by his mere declaration that a man is righteous. And it can happen. So don't challenge God in that way. If he wants to declare a person righteous by imputation, he will do it. And in God's case, he wants to do it and has done it. And so Job says, I don't question a bit that God can declare me righteous, especially since I know my Redeemer and what he's doing for me. 27. Job now continues. Oh, no. Job says to Zophar. Interesting. He's responding to Zophar. How do I know he's responding to Zophar? Because he was responding to Bildad, who was the last to talk. Now he responds to Zophar. How do I know that? Here, I suspect he's responding to Zophar. And the reason is because in verse 13, in chapter 27, in verse 13, here's the fate God allots the wicked, the heritage a ruthless man receives from the Almighty. That's actually a direct quote from Zophar's speech in chapter 20, 7 chapters earlier. And so here I suspect that Job is going all the way back to Zophar's original argument and saying, what were you thinking? And here's what he says, my summary. No matter how much suffering I endure, I will not let you convince me that I am not justified before God, nor will I let you trouble my conscience. I have taught you that there is no hope for the defiled unbeliever. So why'd you make the argument before in chapter 20? That it depends on your good works. Remember, Zophar's the one that was saying, I know you did something wrong because you're miserable. And miserable people did things wrong. And if you did things right, you'd be happy. And so Job is saying, that was dumb. You shouldn't have made that argument. I taught you better than that. I'm going to briefly summarize 28, 29, and 30 and get next week to 31, which is a pivotal chapter. I know we went really fast through all of these. That's because the arguments that Job and that the others are making, I think, are generally repeated. So at 28, Job to all says, men search deep in the ground for treasures, but the greatest treasure of all is wisdom. And it can be found in the ground. It cannot be found in the ground or purchased. It's not like gold. Only God can give wisdom. And the true wisdom I'm talking about, Job says, is this: faith and repentance, which is what I have. That's in verse 28, chapter 28, verse 28. And he said to man, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. Fear and faith are related, remember. So faith in the Lord and to shun evil is understanding. Now, to shun evil means to turn away from evil. That's a description for Job of repentance. So faith and repentance. That's true wisdom. That's what I've been given, and I'm not going to deny it. In chapter 29, this is the best I can do. Job just complains. 29 and 30. These are just complaints. that this could be a softening up for chapter 31, which is where I'm going to argue Job goes wrong. Job chapter 31 is where he allows false heterodox opinions to enter his arguments. And he might have gotten softened up by his complaining in 29 and 30. I'm not sure. But 29, my summary, Job, things used to be so good. And in 30, they're not anymore. Now they're bad for me. And I think if you read the chapters, I think you'll conclude, yeah, that's basically what's going on here. Job is complaining about how good it used to be and how bad it is now. So next time will be 31. 31's important. It's still Job, but he's going to sound different. I'm going to argue. He's going to sound different in chapter 31. And that's what's going to bring the response of a next character that we haven't seen yet, and that is the guy named Elihu. It's very interesting. But you have to wait till next week for that. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God the Father, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all. Amen.
Well,